quorum already present. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our May Grand Rounds. My name is Darshan Mehta. I am the Medical and Education Director for the Osher Center for Integrative Health here at Harvard Medical School and Brigham Women's Hospital. It's really my joy and pleasure to have all of you here for our Grand Rounds presentation entitled Bridging Science and Spirituality, Enhancing Our Understanding of Consciousness, Compassion, and Cognition by Dr. Balachundhar Subramaniam. Before you get started, and I'm going to give a brief intro, I wanted to just let everyone know that this activity is credited for CME credit. And so just send us an email at hmsoshercenter@bwh.harvard.edu, including your full name, degree, and institution, and you'll get CME credit for this. And just as a reminder, this is a webinar format, so just please remain on mute and type your questions into the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. The meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded onto our oshercenter.org website as an archived Grand Rounds, and that will be notified through our distribution list as well. And then just last, but certainly not least, before I make my introductions, our next Grand Rounds will be led by Dr. David Eisenberg on Tuesday, June 3rd, and he'll be discussing the topic of nutritional competencies and its evolution in our times today. And he's the Director of Culinary Nutrition at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So, back to our presenter here, and I will just have the introduction I'm joyed to introduce Dr. Bala Subramaniam. I've had the pleasure of knowing him for, I think now it's been about a decade of my life here in Boston, and he's really a humble individual for all that he has accomplished over the years. He is an anesthesiologist and trained at the premier institution, All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi, specializing in cardiac anesthesia here at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. He also holds a master's in public health and the Harvard T.H. School of Public Health. He's a clinician scientist funded by the National Institutes of Health and the Picori Institute as well. His research has focused on improving post-operative outcomes, particularly cognitive decline following surgery. He's widely published, serves in NIH study sections, reviewer for the New England Journal, and also an editor in multiple journals. But I think what makes this talk special is really his personal transformation and how that intersects with his health leadership. Dr. Bala broadened his scientific pursuits through his meditation practice to include consciousness, cognition, and compassion. In 2020, he founded the Sadhguru Center for a Conscious Planet at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. The center investigates the neurophysiological and cognitive effects of meditation, from enhancing well-being to promoting long-term brain health. And he will talk about some of that. At the heart of the work, though, is a deeply personal philosophy: to cultivate attention without intention, a state of pure awareness that informs both his scientific inquiry and daily life. So with that, I turn it over to Dr. Subramaniam.
Thank you, Darshan, for that kind introduction. Just share my screen in a second. Okay. All right. Darshan and others, can you see the screen?
Yes,
right?
Very good. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Darshan, and thank you, Peter, and thank you, Osher Center, for hosting me. And without wasting, we'll just get into the topic itself. So this was my personal journey then, which turned into a scientific journey as well. So I'm trying to bridge this science and spirituality and share my thoughts. And I'm very happy to take questions at the end. And, we can have this in a form of a discussion, because this is such a difficult topic to navigate from a scientific point of view. So research, nothing is supported or has conflict with the topic that we're presenting today. This is where I come from, Beth Deaconess Medical Center, which is just neighbor to the Brigham and Women's Hospital. And we will just take you through what have we done as Sadhguru Center over the last 5 years in about 5 minutes or so. And then we try to bridge this Eastern and the Western concepts of consciousness, although I say that, but there's a lot of overlap and there are a lot of people who crisscross. So definitely just saying that for the origin's sake. Then we'll talk about the internal conflicts and the inflammation that results from that, specifically the neuroinflammation. And how can we sharpen the tool, that is the brain, to experience the oneness that we are seeking eventually. So that's how a lot is being packed into this. So we'll try and see how much we can cover. So over the last 5 years, our vision is to bridge science and spirituality, and like everyone else who's doing in different formats, and again, to bring that scientific rigor as much as we can. Maybe that there are not enough tools to explore the consciousness in a very rigorous scientific way right now, because at the heart of all this is a subjective experience, whereas science is all about objectively measuring things. So completely at odds. And currently we just don't have tools to do that kind of experimentation. So we have to rely on a lot of phenomenology and also corroborating neural correlates. What have we done in terms of research insights? We have published almost 20 research articles, but mainly because we have taken one particular form of meditation, and it's coming from one particular school, and it has a lot of breadth and depth to it. So that's why we went after that. And of course, we are open to investigating other aspects as well. So from the behavioral assessments, it is very clear, and it is not up for discussion anymore, that yoga and meditation definitely lower stress and anxiety. It's done in the right way, coming from the right school, and doing it in an engaged manner, boosts vitality and positivity and better sleep. And we took on the neuroimaging aspects as well. Like in the last 10, 15 years, several people have gone into this because we get a little bit more high resolution data using 128 or even 256 channel EEGs and functional MRI, and several people has gone into MEG and others. Brain age, and I'll expand on that a little bit more, brainwave impacts and brain network control. We also gone into biomarker discovery, mostly focusing on the internal conflicts and the neuroinflammation aspects, such as a boost in brain health molecules, such as endocannabinoids, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, improved gut health using gut microbiome, as we all know that gut is a second brain, and it influences the way you think, the way you act, the way you respond. And using cutting-edge proteomics, such as SomaScan and SomaLogics, which can measure almost 11,000 proteins and looking for signatures. And looking at transcriptomics and some genetics research with the help of collaborators. Other things that are still to come, but we have completed the studies, such as mystical experiences. As you know, mushroom clinics are mushrooming everywhere. And it seems like we have meditation and yoga and other forms could give similar experiences, which are without having to resort to psychedelics per se. They have their role in patients with severe anxiety and severe depression, but to the general public need it. Enhanced parent-child connection and spiritual psychological growth, etc. That should be coming out as we speak. We have also done some small amount of outreach. For example, in patients with long COVID, couldn't help ourselves not giving them some of these breathing practices. We have seen over 600 patients with long COVID in the last 3-4 years. And we have also done a waitlisted randomized controlled trial, which has been completed and should be coming out within the next 6 months or so. We also have Parkinson's disease. I think 40 to 50% of patients with Parkinson's disease suffer from anxiety specific to them. And our recently completed work shows that definitely simple practices can alleviate their anxiety and make them live better with a particular disease. And of course, cancer is a place where this can be used very much. And we have taken a tactic of doing the educational webinars, bringing neuroscientists and also the spiritual master that I follow, and I think he's very eloquent. Not that I have to just stick to him, but he also gives his time adequately for us to engage in such. conversations, and several of them are on YouTube. And some of these have almost 10 million views. And we are helped by the master himself because he has over 1 billion followers, and those followers also have this longing to know the science behind it. And several people here as well are looking for the scientific aspects. So some of these conversations, such as the one with Bernard Carr, was mentored by Stephen Hawking in the past, but he's a well-known cosmologist and he has his own standing. And their physics conversation about physics of consciousness is just mind-boggling. It's there in YouTube. You can just search it up, and it has more than 1 million views already. And I've learned a lot from that particular journey. And Steven Pinker, who's very intellectual and who doesn't buy into these concepts of extrasensory perceptions or the psi phenomena, if you will, just sticks to his brain and where the consciousness comes from. But it's a fascinating conversation to see an all-encompassing master talking to somebody who's very stuck on the intellectual aspects and taking through the enlightenment from that point of view. And of course, the US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy last year talked about loneliness, and that is his favorite topic. And this discussion, again, has more than 1 million views. There are several others that you can use a QR code and look up. Our community engagement has steadily grown. We are not actively doing anything, but just the content itself, I think, is very much well received by people all over the world. And so I feel like all the work that we and other centers within the Boston area engaging in this are really sought after. So with that, we'll move on to the next idea, that is consciousness from these two angles. I'm just going to keep it really simple and then talk about from my own understanding and also from what I have gathered from holding these educational conversations in the last 5 years and before that. So I just spoke to a neurologist who was a previous editor-in-chief of Annals of Neurology, which is one of the top journals of neurology, and asked him, how do you look at consciousness and what does that mean to you? And he basically said in a private conversation is just aware of being, aware of oneself and relationship to one's environment. And he also brought in the concept of awareness and consciousness, two different things. And concept of awareness requires the cerebral cortex in reasonable working order. We all understand that. And then he talked about awareness can fail fractionally. For example, you are unconscious but wakeful. This is his definition. For example, if somebody has a stroke and a right parietal infarct, they're not aware of the left side. So awareness has failed fractionally in his opinion. And there are unconscious wakefulness states. We all know for example, the locked-in syndrome where they are conscious, but we cannot determine whether they're conscious or not unless you use neuroimaging techniques. And there are people with severe Alzheimer's or hypoxic cortical necrosis where they think that there's no awareness, but they're conscious. So one of the defining things that I asked him is, if a person is asleep, would you consider, he's a sleep researcher, and would you consider that person as conscious or unconscious? That was one of the interesting questions that I thought I posed. And he said they are unconscious. And that's where fundamentally the Eastern philosophy differs from the Western philosophy, that if a person is asleep, they're still conscious. It doesn't mean that they're unconscious. And then he took it further and talked about self-sustaining arousal and what is really required for that, for the arousal part or the wakefulness part. It is the hypothalamic basal forebrain system that is required. So it seems to me that there's a lot of definition problem within the two philosophies, and we confuse consciousness and wakefulness quite a bit. In anesthesia, when we put people to sleep, we call them as unconscious. When we wake up, they say they're conscious. That is a usual medical ways of talking about things. And whereas the Eastern philosophies talk about that as yes, but that is more of a wakefulness. And that's where the requirements for hypothalamic basal forebrain system is there, and which is where all the neural correlates on all the research in the consciousness field from the medical point of view or the scientific point of view has taken place in the last several years. So there seems to be a huge definition problem. For example, you can have your body, your mind. I can have my body, my brain, my mind. But there's nothing called your consciousness and my consciousness, according to the spiritual masters. And they say that there's only one consciousness. You can't say that that's yours and that's mine. It's just that you capture some of this and just using that to activate yourself. So again, going back to the medicine aspects, and this is from my friend and colleague Stephen Loris, who's a neurologist and is also in the field of consciousness, and he has been working for almost 25 years, and he's from the Jiga Consciousness Lab in Belgium. And they put this into two axes. One is the awareness, and the other one is wakefulness. They did not they subdivided consciousness into wakefulness and awareness, and then they put this into two axes. And if you look at general anesthesia and coma, both the content and as well as the wakefulness is completely low. And there's nothing, you all have, probably some of you have gone through general anesthesia and just you are stone out cold. You have no idea what's going on, and patients wake up and generally ask, have you started yet? So that just tells you that you're completely out cold. There is no level or there's no content here. And then when you look at the other states, it's a minimally conscious states or unresponsive wakefulness syndrome. This is very well recognized in neurology. And using neuroimaging techniques, they're able to tell who is in which state and whether somebody can be reversed or not. And as it is explained here, unresponsive wakefulness syndrome is a vegetative state, and it's very unlikely that they will come back. And they seem to have a level of consciousness, but their content itself is very low. And when you look at the deep sleep, light sleep, and drowsiness and conscious state, they're going along this, along this axis. And locked-in syndrome is a classic example that people talk about. They are receiving all the information, but they just cannot respond. And so when you're looking for response measures, there will be none. And you might mistakenly think that they are not conscious enough, but later on, they will, completely elaborate exactly what has gone when they were in those locked-in syndrome states when they come out of it. Lucid dreaming is one state where there's a lot of content, and several discoveries have been made during the lucid dreaming states. But there is wakefulness. When you measure that, it seems like they're not wakeful enough, at least in the classic ways that we elicit that. Now, in 2018, Emery Brown is a neuroscientist, anesthesiologist, and he works at MIT and MGH, and he's very well known. He's in the National Academy of Science, the National Academy of Medicine, and also National Academy of Psychology and Mathematics. So he's got a lot of these, and we brought him to have a conversation with the spiritual master, and his name is Sadhguru, at the Harvard Sanders Theater. And let's say what
you have a bridge in Tacoma, Washington. I don't know if you've seen this, the bridge in Tacoma, Washington, and all of a sudden, it starts to oscillate in a perfect sine wave, just like this, and no traffic can go across the bridge. It's the same thing that happens under anesthesia.
Basically, he's trying to say that from the brain perspective, if you're going to oscillate, all your brain waves are going to be in oscillation, especially if you look at EEG, low alpha, the thalamocortical loop, no information can pass through, and so you don't really process anything and you're thrown out cold as an anesthesiologist. So he has done this work, is published, and I know we look at molecular mechanisms and we still don't understand what does that mean. We're able to stop all this and just bring them back. Is it as simple as that?
You have a bridge.
So it seems like from the neurologist, from the anesthesiologist, and from several people, it seems like consciousness is something that originates from the brain. So just remember, being conscious is different from the consciousness itself. So adding that ness totally changes what we are talking about. So there's a definition problem when somebody tries to argue. First thing I ask is, please define where are you coming from before we actually engage in that conversation. So what are the popular theories of consciousness? This was published in Nature Neuroscience by Anil Seth, who's a very well-known psychologist from UK, and he has been in this space of consciousness for quite some time. So this is the popular theory from 1990s, I suppose, global workspace theory, or the global neuronal workspace theory. So let's say that sensory inputs, everything is coming from below, and it is being perceived by different parts of the brain, and suddenly there's something called an ignition that happens, and this workspace gets activated and you perceive as consciousness. So this is what they discuss as consciousness. So just to go back a little bit about the initial, when Ed Block and others have talked about access consciousness, which is, it's an ability to describe memory, attention, judgment, and a verbal report of what is happening right now. I'm talking, you're listening, and you're able to comprehend what I'm talking. So they refer to that as a gross consciousness level. And of course, for them, for that to happen, prefrontal cortex is the main area for region of interest for them. But where does it fail? It doesn't talk about the experience itself. The general thing that David Chalmers and others from NYU, they talk about is the blueness of the sky or the experience of pain, etc., is something that you can't really tell where is that coming from. That is the fundamental problem that many of us are grappling with. How do we actually explain that experience itself? So the next popular concept is integrated information theory. And so here what they're talking about is there is irreducible particles, or you can call it as irreducible small components, which will explain consciousness itself. The more components you have it, the more the richness of the experience. So it's almost like if you have 10 particles, or you have 20 or 100. So we are the most advanced, living things in life currently, and so we seem to have the advanced amount of experience. So that is a privilege and also a blessing. And here they talk about phenomenal consciousness, that is the experience itself. So it's so good to explain that portion of it. And as a cause-effect model, it says that individual irreducible component is responsible for the consciousness itself. And for them, it's all about the posterior cortex. Sometimes you wonder, there are several traditions which protects your posterior cortex by different, whether it being a Jew or whether it being a Hindu, or several religions actually protect that. Has it got something to do with it? And there is an understanding, at least in the ancient Indian philosophy, that seems like the so-called energy or the consciousness itself enters through that fontanelle that is open in the childhood or as a fetus. What does it fail? It fails to connect consciousness to other aspects of the mind. It completely ignores the prefrontal cortex. It doesn't talk about the memory, the attention, the judgment, and the verbal reports. There's a researcher at BU who talks about memory is consciousness. Again, we'll come back to that a little bit later as to where is the problem in that particular theory. The other theories are higher order theories. This is very simple. They say that, well, there is a lot of information that is coming at you, whether it is sensory or perceptual or other forms of information. And you have to have that meta representation, that is a metacognition or the meta awareness. And that is the one that makes you conscious. And that explains both phenomenal and access consciousness. And the problem is they don't know where it is coming from. They think it is prefrontal cortex, and it just fails to account for the importance of the posterior cortex there. So, but it's simple explanation without really telling you where is this meta-awareness coming from. The other one is the re-entry and prediction processing. Prediction processing is not exactly a theory, but it's more like an explanation. It's coming from Anil Seth's work. And re-entry processes, people like George Mashur and others from Michigan have talked about it, where let's say there is an input that is coming from bottom up, and now you have information stored in your cortex that expects and then speeds up these perception. And so there is this loop that is formed. You continuously predict, and if there's an error, you correct, and you keep going. So that is the prediction processing technique, or the re-entry technique there, which is responsible for the consciousness itself. So it's a continuous refinement and prediction process that's happening. It is possible that all the theories that I spoke about are existing. It's almost like looking at the elephant, that analogy that most of you are familiar with. Somebody holds the tail, somebody holds the ears, somebody holds the face, and say, this is it, this is it, this is it. But possibly that all of this is involved. And, even if these tracks don't exist, the consciousness does exist, so it doesn't really explain that. So that's where that fails. And alterations in the path, for example, if there is a distraction or brain injury, etc., you still have consciousness, and it's not able to explain exactly how the re-entry and prediction processing are responsible for the consciousness itself. So the fundamental problem that we have been struggling with is probably a combination of all these things could explain the individual experiences, or the small c, if you will, that is we as human beings. That is, again, qualification that being is something that is given only to us. And we are the highest evolved organism, and seems like we are now blessed with this metacognition, and probably we are able to experience the consciousness itself. through using consciousness. So that little c experiencing the big C, if you will. The struggle for majority of people, at least in psychology, neurology, and other places, is the qualia, the experience of it. Christoph Koch, who's who worked with Prick and others, basically he talks about how does a 3-pound organ with a consistency of tofu exudes the feeling of life, and he has gone through some experiences recently, and he talks about all the time that, oh, we have been explaining the small c, if you will, but my experiences go beyond the mind and body, and it's just not, we won't be able to experience it. And so he put this out in 2018 in Nature, but I think it's just completely changed now. In personal conversations, he talks about his experiences. So it seems like qualia is explainable by the integrated information theory, and it is applicable to any system, not just brains, right? For example, the pan-psychology theory of everything is conscious in this world is only the question of the metacognition and your ability to perceive the consciousness itself that is only possible in potentially human beings alone. And accounts for unity and complexity. So it's good. It's called the phi, and that's the symbols they use to measure that. And they've come up with some ways to measure perturbation complexity indices, especially in people with brain injury, as to the level of consciousness using that. And it also matches some empirical data. When we use a machine and measure it during sleep, anesthesia, coma, it seems like there's low phi and high phi in waking in psychedelic states. Again, not very well accepted by almost all neuroscientists. So it's an evolving theory, and it's criticized quite a lot. We talked about the qualia and applicable to any systems and matches, and it's also mathematically formalized in a form of testable theories. So what are the unanswered questions? The questions that are animal conscious. That some people generally ask that. It seems like they are. Can machines develop consciousness? That's very much a question right now, especially with AI and other. And how can we explain a near-death experience? People like Stephen Lawrence and several researchers from within US have accumulated quite a number of cases with clear explanations of near-death experiences and not able to explain how is that coming from. EEG signals recorded in the brain after the proclamation of clinical death. George Mashour actually has published some of these work and talks about how are these EEG signals coming from? How do you explain if you really know that the person has died? And then this psi phenomena, all these extrasensory perceptions and other things that we talk about, how do you explain that? And several people actually take that route to say that it is beyond the mind and body, and you can project much beyond your brain and your body itself. All this journey started because I asked a very innocent question: how does anesthesia induce unconsciousness way back almost 13, 14 years ago, and we're still figuring out.
Anesthesia cannot touch consciousness. It can only take away memory. I was blown away by that answer because that's not the way we think consciousness of. And
so that was what the spiritual master answered, that you can never touch consciousness. Nothing can touch it. The only thing that you're doing in anesthesia is just taking away the memory. So I just want to connect here what the Boston University neurologist researcher basically has done. That is, memory is the basis of consciousness and basis of your existence. It talks about the genetic memory and other forms of memory, not just to the brain, but throughout the body. But when you take the memory itself, the Eastern understanding is that it goes beyond the genes. It goes to unconscious memories also. It goes to elemental memory. It goes to atomic memory. So there's no explanation for all of that. So it seems like memory is important. If memory dissolves, you don't exist. But that you as an individual, or you can call it as a little c. But when you look at the whole consciousness, then you are just embedded in that whole feature, and memory cannot explain that. Going beyond the memory and also the the future predictions, etc., is what we are trying to get out of in order to experience the consciousness itself.
But actually, the more I learn about the brain and the mind, I think the more I'm just fascinating, and I look at it with marvel. And it's incredible how much actually we ignore about the mind and the brain.
So this is something Sadhguru, are these one and the same? Mind and brain?
Well, in the yogic sciences, we do not accord the kind of significance that…
So basically, he's trying to talk about the distinction between the mind and brain and how they don't subscribe to brain as a source of consciousness because it does things that you don't want it to do many times. So it is just an organ and treated as such. So Stephen Lawrence again talked about we talked about consciousness of environment, conscious of self, and then there is universal consciousness that the neurologist didn't bring up, whereas the Stephen Lawrence group is actually trying to bring that up. So they talk about regions that are responsible for the internal and regions are responsible for the external awareness. And they've identified this using the neuroimaging techniques. And it seems like several of these theories explain sensory stimuli and elicitation and response to that, but not really talking about the thoughts that you have, the perception that you have, and that they call it as the internal awareness or the self-awareness. And they have identified a few areas within there. Again, all to the little c itself. And they talk about Matthew Ricard's brain. If you are aware, Matthew Ricard is a Buddhist monk, and he's from France, and he's a PhD in neurobiology. And they have looked at his connectivity, and it's a highly connected organ. Brain is a highly connected organ, again, alluding to the fact that when you have that much streamlined, well-connected brain, you have developed a tool that, if it is really refined well, can be in sync with everything outside, and your perception has to go up. When your perception goes up, when you stop talking and when you start listening, and when your perception goes up, then there are experiences that are very profound that cannot be explained. And so it seems like we have to prepare the brain as a tool to be in sync with the external environment in order to perceive and experience the world at large. So do the plants have the capacity to learn, remember, and make choices? Monica from Australia, in a personal conversation, she talks about there are stories when there are big elephants, when they go and start eating the leaves from the trees, the surrounding trees actually start closing up. And because they want to protect, it seems like while the elephant is eating this particular tree, the other tree starts generally closing. So you have a limited window within which the elephant has to finish his food. So it seems like there is some intelligence, not just within the tree or the plant, but there are surrounding trees which has some kind of connection and understands what is going on. And sometimes there is a sound of bees and how flowers become sweet. And actually she has theorized this and actually done this research and published them. And plants don't have neurons, yet they can think just like the slime and the moles. So she talks about.
When we search, we find. And for example, I demonstrated how this plant, Mimosa pudica, also known as the sensitive plant, can remember for a long time a disturbance and can also learn to ignore it when it proves to be totally inconsequential. And this was such a groundbreaking finding that Michael Pollan actually featured it as the intelligent plant in one of his major articles for the New Yorker. When we search, we find. And for example, I demonstrated how this plant, Mimosa pudica, also known as the sensitive plant, can remember.
You get the idea. So Donald Hoffman, who's trained as a mathematician from MIT, and now currently in UCI, talks about.
I think yes. I think that scientists and spirituality people can work together and bring our insights to have a very human approach and yet a very rigorous approach to understanding the question of consciousness, so we can finally understand who we are. And that's
So it's called a theory called conscious agents theory, and he has actually done it mathematically and published it, and talks about how we have to go beyond the smallest particle described in physics, and also the mind and the brain and the body that we talk about. So for him, it's like evolution hides reality to facilitate survival. And he calls this like a computer desktop, where you see a lot of icons, but hidden behind the icons there are a lot of other things, but they have simplified it for you to look at just the icons so you can be functional. But when you look deeper, what you see is not actually the reality. And Swami Swarupriyananda from New York, who's a very well-known monk from the Vivekananda style, and he talks about the knower, known, and state. Very simply put, it's like clay. Consciousness is like the clay. And you see different forms of clay, like a pot or something else that has been made, and you call them as individuals, but you forgot that the clay is a fundamental aspect. So consciousness is a fundamental fabric from which everything comes, through which we see everything, with which we do experience everything. So it's like the movie screen. The movie screen on which the movie is projected, we look at the movie and forget about the screen, and screen is the fundamental aspect. And this has been described in the Vedic context as well. And yoga describes different forms of wakefulness, if you will. They call it as Jagriti, the wakefulness that we as medical people are just dealing with. And then there are vivid dream states, it's called sapna, and there are dreamless states where you're still aware, that's called the sushubdi. And after you evolve, this intelligence without memory. So it was unsullied by the memory of the past and imaginations of the future. And that is the pure awareness states. And there are people from University of Wisconsin now trying to describe this pure awareness states and what are the EEG signatures when you are in that state, taking some of those very evolved Buddhist monks and trying to look at that EEG. Can computers develop consciousness over a period of time?
Not. Machines can become everything that you are. Can do everything that you can do, probably better than you. As you know, they are doing things better than you. Only thing is, they cannot become consciousness. Well, some people are saying we will build consciousness into a machine. That's not going to happen, because that's life. What you call as consciousness is the essence of life, that which cannot be described, for that which we don't have a word to say what it is, that which is that indescribable force which makes everything happen. That will not happen in a machine, 100%. Not?
So Rupert Spira, who's from Oxford, his inspiration was Ramana, and probably some of you know him. And they talk about how the stillness speaks, and they actually divide the brain into multiple angles. So actually, my own spiritual master also puts it in such a way. There's intellect and there's intelligence. These are two different things, whereas medical world thinks of intellect as everything. And we have to really get out of that concept. And this is David Bohm, who worked with Einstein.
Yes, and it's clear that thinking cannot do it. No?
Thought cannot do it.
No. All right, now, because…
That's the point.
We've got
you
all
have
that.
an insight into it.
Yes, now this insight will be the action of the mind, through intelligence and attention.
When there is that insight, intelligence wipes away suffering.
Yes, now you're saying that therefore there is a contact from mind to matter which removes the whole physical chemical structure, which keeps us going on with suffering.
In that ending, there's a mutation in the brain cells.
Yes,
we discussed this some years ago, this question.
Yes, but that mutation just wipes out the whole structure that makes you suffer. Right?
Therefore, it's like I've been going along a certain tradition. I suddenly change that tradition. There is a change in the whole brain, which has been going north, and now it goes east. There is a…
Yes, well, of course, this is a radical notion from the point of view of traditional ideas in science, because if we accept that mind is different from matter, then it's hard. People would find it hard to say that mind would actually…
Mind, after all, is, would you put it mind is pure energy?
Well, we could put it that way, but say matter is energy too.
So I'm going to stop it there, but someone, if you're interested, it's a fascinating set of conversations from mid-1900s, which is chronicled in YouTube or free. And this man is J. Krishnamurti, and his pure intellect. If someone is not happy to follow gurus and Eastern traditions, but you can follow this particular man who's very intellectual, and he doesn't call himself as a global teacher, but that's exactly what he does. And actually, it's just fascinating to engage in these conversations. We all try to analyze our problems out. It doesn't work in every situation, especially the severe the problem. Analysis paralysis is something very well described. So it seems like you have to allow yourself to have that insight to solve your issues rather than just analyzing and paralyzing yourself. And he attributes that to the intelligence aspect.
Yes, and it's...
Repeat that. Consciousness is that in which all experience appears. It is that with which all experience is known. And it is that out of which all experience is made. Repeat that.
So, Carl Jung, who's very well known, is basically saying that that I cannot explain doesn't mean that it's a fraud. You just have to put in more effort, see where the knowledge is, and accept it. And if you really think it is possible, so just don't say that there's nothing called yogic science, there's nothing called Eastern science or Eastern philosophy, etc. So the core features are consciousness is a fundamental non-local field. It's different from wakefulness. And humans are the ones that are described as the beings. Probably they're the ones who have the metacognition ability. And it seems to me that the default mode network, which is constantly on in all of us, is the one that is, putting this screen and not allowing us to perceive the reality itself. So that's why you have to turn inwards and have this internal awareness. And when the subject and the object boundary fades, you can access the non-local field. It's easily said, but it needs practice. And that's where the attention without intention comes, which Darshan was mentioning. And that's my inspiration to have that ability and to sharpen the tool. So going on to I'm just going to skip the inflammation internal conflict piece and go into the sharpening the tool experience, the oneness. So we'll just skip this. You're all aware of the default mode network and the neuropsychological benefits, etc. So we'll skip all of that and we'll just go straight away into, I'll just talk about the internal conflicts and the neuroinflammation piece. So this is a fascinating work, transcriptomics, in about 100 or more meditators, and we'd gone through an 8-day meditation retreat. Vijay from University of Florida actually led this work. He's an expert in this particular area. And what you find here is these are the meditators on the leftmost aspect. And the central piece are the set of genes called STAT genes that are activated that are responsible for fighting against COVID. Compare that with people with severe COVID in the middle, where it's smaller bubbles and blue, that means it's downregulated. The STAT genes are not active. It seems like when there is less conflict, you can actually fight against the anti-inflammatory machinery is turned up, and the pro-inflammatory, that is at baseline inflammation. For example, autoimmune diseases, when there is no external invasion, you have baseline inflammation. Those things are turned down. So somehow there's a connection that when the lesser and lesser of the internal conflict, the higher your ability and your preparedness to fight against an external invasion, and your body's at a low inflamed state. We've also measured CRP levels, which are 1/3 compared to the controls who did not do any contemplative practices. This was over 100 people or so where we measured the CRP levels. Now, this is an ongoing work with one of our postdocs, Namit Ole, who's doing the proteomics in over 5,000 over 5,000 proteins in over 100 people. And you can see that ability to fight infections enhanced, things like hemp, etc., goes up. And your baseline inflammation is reduced. These are the purple proteins on the left-hand side. This work is being submitted and hopefully it'll get accepted. And we talked about the gut microbiome. And then sharpening the tool, I just want to bring a little bit here. Our functional MRI work has shown enhanced connectivity and your ability to take control of the switch, the salient center, which is over here, and the default mode network over there. And it seems like your ability to switch between mind-wandering states and an executive state, such as a task or breath watching, is enhanced with these kind of retreats. So Sarah Lazar has shown that the brain thickness increases. It seems that the functional connectivity will increase, and you will have better control of the awareness. And I initially mentioned about Matthew Ricard's brain and this better connectivity we talked about. This is again an ongoing work with one of our postdocs, Riku, and he has looked at Shunya meditation, which is a 15-minute conscious non-doing process, where he has shown with his graph theory that there's enhanced long-range connectivity. It's like the highways that are being connected and less chaotic local connectivity. So it seems like you have a better thickness of the brain, you have better functional connectivity of the brain, and you have this kind of long-range connections, which can be obtained only with sleep, that good regenerative sleep, and that you're getting with this kind of 15-minute meditative process. And seems like you have a very good tool. Not just that, and this work, which was just accepted for publication in the Mindfulness Journal, in collaboration with Brandon Westover's group, Neurology from MGH, meditators seem to have a 6 years younger brain. We used EEG techniques to show that. This paper should be coming out within the next 2-3 weeks. So you have a neurobiologically younger brain, and you have a functionally connected brain, and you have a very thick brain. Seems like now we have prepared the tool. And actually, when you go through these meditative processes and gain the awareness, you can actually wrap it up in a pleasant state of mind, like enhanced Anandamide, which we have shown that there is a 70% increase with these retreats. So what else do you need? Have a better tool wrapped in pleasantness in order to be in sync with the life around us. So there are ups and downs in life, but with awareness, you can actually make that angle go up. You can improve your profoundness of experience and make the lows low and make the highs high. And that is all life is all about, the profoundness of experience and the impact that you create. And what are we waiting for, right? It seems like the EEG signatures, this is an ongoing work, but if you're able to breath watch, if you look at this particular figure, at almost 3 minutes or so, you start actually seeing the EEG signatures, and peaks around 7 minutes, and on most plateaus at 15 minutes. So it seems like that is all you really need to start somewhere and then slowly build that up. And let's craft a future grounded in science and silence. And consciousness is really, really important, especially in the current era that we are living in, which is full of conflicts. And I thank almost all my collaborators without whom this is not possible, and everybody from the Sadhguru Center, notably some of our long-lasting people such as Sepide and others who have been really very helpful in doing this, making this vision possible. So eventually I leave you with this thought. It's a fundamental intelligence that crafts both body and brain and is a way forward for all issues within and without. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bala. What a beautiful presentation that really sort of brings together the science of consciousness with obviously a lot of, I guess I would say, first-person experience from various spiritual traditions, and obviously most notably, work that's being done through Isha as well. I guess one of the questions that came up for me as I'm thinking about consciousness is, and in this one of the in the Q&A, I'm going to kind of broaden the question. What have we learned around the experience of death and consciousness? Some people, some of the spiritual traditions will say that there's a full awareness of consciousness that happens just before the moment, or in the moments preceding it. And I know I've certainly had that experience in a family member where I saw there was a whole lucidity that happened, and then the person passed away. But I don't know if that's been studied in any way, or if you have anything you want to say, especially as an anesthesiologist too.
No, totally. So I have had a personal experience. Fortunately or unfortunately, it was almost a near-death experience when I had my heart attack at home. And so the next 3 days was like a witness for me. So everything that was happening, for example, I was taking the cath lab and I told my cardiologist, hey, I think I need Lasix, my lungs are drowning. So cardiologist said, just shut up and I'll take care of you. But basically, it was a witness experience without any fear, anxiety, pain, as though that someone else is suffering from this, right? So that is the personal experience. Now, what about, what do the traditions say? The Eastern traditions talk about the life after death. And in fact, they say that that is much more profound than this. And there are several stories and several, I didn't go into that specifically because it seems like what is relevant to us as intensivists or as anesthesiologists is there's something called principle of double effects. When a person is in the end of life, people overdo sedation and they think that, okay, or analgesics, they think that they're suffering and let's just overdo it, right? And no one should suffer, but they should be fully aware when they're dying. That awareness during death is extremely important to what happens to you after. And that is something we're trying to bring it up. There's a book called Death and What Happens During. It seems like medical death, we call it as something that happens right away, but actual death process happens over 14 days in the spiritual tradition. So there are several, it's a very big topic. There's several things that we need to talk about in death.
Great. No, it's, again, something interesting. Just another question, really thinking about the assertion that machines cannot become consciousness. So is there a structural or energy feature of the human body that supports the experience of consciousness that cannot be, cannot be arguably constructed in a technological way?
Right. So energy is one thing that is, we have been trying to talk to a number of people and see how to measure that energy, right? Several meditators, any tradition, they talk about how energized they are. How can we actually measure that, or the energy that leaves the body? Or, there's a set of people who are doing experiments on animals when they die, and how there is some energy that comes out, and they're using IR and UV cameras to capture that. And we are trying to do that as of now, this weekend, there's a consecration that is happening in Nashville, Tennessee. So we are collaborating with few people like Institute of Noetic Sciences and others to measure that energy and see whether we can document some of those. But these are fascinating areas, very fringe and not very well accepted in the traditional science.
Okay. What has been, again, as you know, an emerging topic that's become very popular as you've been thinking about how psychedelics have been used. And certainly in many contemplative practices, psychedelics, even if you look at many of the scriptures, and so there were some element of psychedelic was sometimes suggested for the right individual to use as a way to augment a meditation or practice. But anything that you've seen in the experiences of consciousness, as we used to be afraid of it, but now I think now we're engaging it even more, like this is actually an important tool to be used.
No, very important question. So actually, we have completed research on more than 200 participants in retreats. And what we have found, we have used the consciousness scales. There are measurements which we can use for the mystical experiences scale. And the mystical experiences scales have actually shown that there is this mystical experience in over 70% of participants in the retreats. So even if you look at psychedelic usage, you can have adverse reactions, right? Not everyone has the same sense of this feeling. And only about 40% of people can have an experience that can be an anchor for the rest of their life. Plus, there is this comment that, is it a distorted perception, or is it really that experience of something beyond your mind and body that is going to bring you out of this depths of despair that you are in, like severe depression or anxiety? Those are open questions. But when there is an alternative that is available, like a retreat that can give you at a 70% rate of these experiences without any negative effects, why not? So we will publish it next year, but we have found that using Ralph Wood, I think that's his name, it's called the Wood's scale of this particular experiences and mystical experiences.
And then perhaps a question that sort of ties in a couple of questions that are in the Q&A. There are a whole bunch there, but is just the notion of collective consciousness. I know you touched upon a little bit in your talk, but the idea of I think in a healthcare system we think of patient and provider interactions. In some ways, it's a collective consciousness that if there's a concordance between the patient and the provider or the client and the therapist, that actually facilitates growth, a growth mindset arguably for both individuals, but certainly for the patient and the client. So how has that been explored through some of the work you've been doing, thinking about, and then now we think of it in a broader sort of global context as well?
Right. So in the same consecration, we have put random number generators. I think Sepide will know this much better than I, which will measure the randomness of the number generation. And that is one way to say when there's something happening in a collective group process, there seems to be that it's not random anymore, and that will be shifted. So that is one work that will happen this weekend. And secondly, we are also exploring in the clinical settings where if a patient and a provider are doing, patient and patient's relative are doing the meditation, whether one can influence the other. And so there are patients who will not be able to do the meditative aspects, but if their relatives do it, can they influence the way they feel and they suffer?
Yeah. Okay. And last question is just thinking for, you alluded to the notion of an adverse outcome and this notion of what is a break from consciousness versus, being fully aware, where we see that some people who have sort of a break from reality or break from in a state of psychosis, it's still, there's awareness and yet it's deleterious. And how is that something you've explored as well in your work?
We haven't explored, it's more theoretical work, and we're trying to really find out how does use of psychedelics differ from meditative experiences. And you also know there's a group in Brown University actually exploring the adverse effects of meditation and yoga itself. I'm not talking about the postural yoga, but just the meditation and psychological effects. A lot to be done in this area, but I'll just quote this from what Sadhguru says is, if you use a psychedelic, if you think that you're moving from one side of the screen to the other side, you're actually making a hole and moving through that into the other side and experiencing the world. So you will pay a price for making that kind of a hole because you're distorting things. Whereas if you do meditation and yoga and that kind of contemplative practices, you're squeezing yourself onto the other side and experiencing the world. So there is no damage or it's not non-existent. So that is what he says, that there will be a price paid for use of psychedelics. I don't know. I'm sure that people are exploring that, especially medical research is being very careful and they're using it in a thoughtful way. So hopefully, we'll learn more.
Great. All right. Obviously, a lot generated here in terms of conversation and questions. Thank you, Bala, for such a stimulating conversation. I think there are several questions in the chat and Q&A whether this will be available as a recording. It will be, as I mentioned earlier, as a recording on our website on oshercenter.org. But again, thank you so much for such a stimulating discussion, and we look forward to having perhaps a part 2 in the future as you uncover some of these mysteries of life and consciousness. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Peter, and thanks everyone. Yeah, thank you so much.
So we're just before we wrap up, I just wanted to come back to remind everyone that we will be again in our discussions next month, June 3rd, discussing the evolving nature of nutrition and nutritional competencies in medicine. That will be discussion be led by Dr. David Eisenberg, who's the Director of Culinary Nutrition, former Director of the Osher Center, and is based at the Harvard T.H. Scan School of Public Health. So please do attend. It aims to be an exciting discussion. And then again, last but not least, we hope and encourage you to support Osher Center. We do so many different activities, including these grand rounds, the Biennial Network Forum Tai Chi Conference, courses at the Osher Clinical Center, research and planetary health programming. And we have here the QR code for your reference, or you can go to the oshercenter.org website. But again, with that, we're just really, again, excited for such a beautiful discussion. Thank you to all of you who attended, and look forward to continuing dialogues. Take care, everyone. Be well.